Hi, I'm Ada Bobineau, the founder and director of the San Antonio Black International Film Festival. And I hope that you have enjoyed our presentation today, Not in My Neighborhood. And we are so delighted to have the filmmaker and co-producer to join us in a post-discussion. So hope you've gotten a chance to get your popcorn and get your drinks and you're settling back down for a serious discussion about the film and the topic that is so impactful in the lives of so many people, especially today. I want to first bring on Najma Naridin. Did I pronounce your name right? Your last name right?
Nordine.
Nordine, I'm sorry.
Nordine.
Najma Nordine. I should have asked you that before we started.
All good.
I say Najma, but the co-producer, and we want to also bring on Kurt. Hey, Kurt.
Hey.
Co-producer and director. And thank you all for taking the time to be with us. I want to just say that when I watched the film, I walked away feeling like, you know how some things stay with you in terms of like when you go into a neighborhood, you typically are just enjoying the present, but you don't think about what happened for this neighborhood to have gotten to the way it is, to be gentrified or whatever. You don't think about it. And I experienced that just through the neighborhood that I had left in DC. It was, neighborhood community there. And then all of a sudden just bam. And it hits you quickly and things take over very quickly. So it really had an impact on me. And the people's stories were so gripping. And so I know that a lot of people felt that watching it. So thank you for even bringing this story to life, these stories to life. So I want to just start by let me just hear. I'll start with you, Najma, and then Kurt. I just kind of want to hear about your journeys that got you started as a filmmaker that makes certain type of films.
Okay.
And we'll talk further about how you got to this particular film.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. I haven't thought about this for a while, actually. But so I guess when I was an undergrad in San Francisco at SF State, that's when I took my first filmmaking class. I took an introduction to documentary filmmaking. And that's when I was in my last year about to graduate. I just took a class in film just to check it out, to see what's it all about, really. I was already going to graduate with my degree in speech and communications with the emphasis in performance. And so I was interested in performing, storytelling. And then I just said, let me just see what is documentary filmmaking all about. I took that intro my last semester in undergrad, and that's when I was, thinking, okay, cool, maybe I could be a filmmaker. Seems pretty powerful, interesting. I'm drawn to this idea of storytelling, telling different stories that interest me. And so after I took that intro class, I then went to LA and I worked for a little as like an assistant, a PA, that kind of stuff for an all Black production company, which I really enjoyed because it was 2 Black women who were the CEOs. And from there, I was like, okay, cool. I'm learning the field. I'm working kind of in the industry, but I'm in this assistant position. How long is it going to take for me to be in a position where I can make my own content, write my own stories? But I really didn't know about the whole history, the whole story, the whole idea of filmmaking. So that's when I decided, okay, I should go to film school. So from there, I went to film school. I went to Howard. And that's what really got me into the history of cinema. The origins of it, the power of storytelling, the types of storytelling, especially like within Black cinema. What is the history of our films and our presence within the film industry and within storytelling. So that's what really kind of flipped the script for me of like, okay, the real power of filmmaking, what you can do with it beyond the Hollywood kind of format or formula. And so from there, I started, making films in film school. I, learned a lot, met a lot of amazing people, had a lot of amazing professors and mentors. And then once I graduated, I went and I moved to Cape Town. I started working for nonprofits and just doing independent filmmaking, making my own content, collaborating with people like Kurt. And
so how do you, I gotta interrupt. How do you just, I moved to South Africa, I moved to Cape Town. How do you just move to Cape Town from
well, because there's like a really long story with that. I just like glossed over that. Like, I just went to Cape Town. But it just happened to work out. And it wasn't anything I ever planned. And I feel a lot of times when I travel places, I've never planned to go there. I never had it on my list per se. And it worked out like that. I guess we can say like the stars aligned. I moved to Cape Town. I was working, being an independent filmmaker. That's really my background is in like grassroots filmmaking, not so much like, I want to go to Hollywood and I want to work in the industry, right? That wasn't really how we were molded or inspired to do when we were in film school at Howard. That wasn't what I feel like was a narrative. We weren't being pushed that idea to go into the industry. It was more like, tell your stories, tell your personal stories, your family stories, tell them outside of these constraints, be as true to yourself as possible. So maybe going into this industry is not the best thing for you. So I was always very content with like just being an independent filmmaker, doing my own thing. And then, freelancing, working for nonprofits, that sort of thing. And so it's always been like, maybe I've been doing things like teaching, freelancing, and all the same while working on my own, whether it's like writing scripts or making short films, short documentaries, whatever the case. And so that's kind of been my journey into filmmaking thus far. And I'm still doing that. I'm still teaching. I'm still working on my independent projects. And I also still like work kind of, mainstream a little bit, but it's always like, okay, what do I have going on? What is my story that I constantly want to work on to get made, whether it's through my own funding or like getting grants or whatever the case. It's always like a hustle, right, to get your projects made.
So Kurt, what about you? I mean, you are originally from South Africa. How did let's tell us about your journey in terms of how you started filmmaking, and what do you gravitate towards when you're trying to do projects?
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. So yeah, I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and my journey really started in growing up in Cape Town, specifically in the most southern tip of Africa, whereby indigenous storytelling and storytelling in general, just as a artistic form, as an African people, has always been part of the DNA of our existence. And for me, it's, like understanding this history, this rich history of storytelling was really one of the major turning points, I think, for my understanding of what storytelling means and what cinema means, both from a local perspective, being from South Africa, and also from a kind of more broader the Black experience through cinema globally. So those were all things that really inspired me to want to make film. But then I ended up going to film school, did that journey, and then started freelancing, working in the film industry in South Africa. I worked in like mainstream television. I worked for our national broadcaster for a number of years, producing content on a daily basis, traveling around the country, and also just learning about South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, trying to really get to the pulse of like, what is it that's how do we think through ideas around reconciliation, restorative justice, etc. And film and the medium of filmmaking as a form of storytelling was a powerful tool for me to and also just like be of service to the communities, be of service to my country. I then started working as an independent filmmaker about 15 years ago. Producing my own work. I come out of the kind of underground hip hop youth culture scene, and that was a really like a big influence. I think just the kind of the like the politics of hip hop, for example, which really shaped my global lens, my understanding of the world as an African, and also hip hop, obviously, again as a conduit to connect to Black people in the diaspora, which is really just a turning point in terms of my political consciousness, and also coming of age. During like kind of post 1994, our first democratic elections, witnessing the release of Nelson Mandela.
How old were you? How old were you when you witnessed that? How old were you? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
when Nelson Mandela
so that was 1990, right? February 1990.
You were grown. Okay.
Yeah, and I was about. I was 10 years old.
Wow.
I was 9 years old, and I remember sitting with my parents in the lounge area on a little black and white television.
Wow.
And then seeing Nelson Mandela. Not really understand the magnitude of what this means as a 9-year-old boy, sitting in a township in South Africa. But I knew it was a big moment, right? We've heard about this figure, Nelson Mandela. There's never been, remember, prior to us seeing him, he's released. A lot of people have never seen the man, right? Some kind of photographic image, because those were all banned, right? So those were critical moments, and also what was that the medium that was used for us to actually see the man walk was film, right? The moving camera. So with that, all of that in the background playing itself out, I wanted to really engage with understanding South Africa's history, and it was filmmaking. Became the vehicle that I started using as a mode of communication, but also how do we think about history, in the context of the personal and the political, and how you engage with history and your lived experience within history, right? So it's really it's that, but also it's the stories of my family. It's the story of loss of land, of dispossession, colonization, slavery, all of that. That's playing in the background, in really shaping my political lens to engage with filmmaking as a form of communication. But again, it was also watching work. People like a great inspiration was someone like Haile Gerima, learning about his work, watching Sankofa, Battle of Ada, which was like major zeitgeist moment, in my age journey. Osman Samben.
Yeah.
Those were like critical figures, I think, that, because we grew up with Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood, like white cinema, right? But it was people like Haile, Osman Samben, and then later on Julia Dash, etc., Daughters of a Dash, that really put me on to really understanding that there's something called black cinema, and how can I contribute, to the broader discourse of black cinema. So those were just my own coming of age journey, as a young person growing up in South Africa, and my understanding of why I wanted to make films.
So it's not just making films, though. You Azania Productions, your production company, and even this project, not first project, but this project, is really just from hearing you a second ago, growing up in township and seeing Nelson Mandela's release and the whole. So your family and you actually experience what we're seeing in the film. And so I was going to ask, how did the concept of the project come about? But from personal experience,
Yeah. Not My Neighborhood really came out of a body of work that I've been engaged with over the last 10 years at least, telling the story around dispossession and land and memory, right? How people remember land, and how land remembers, right? you have the history of dispossession, colonization, evictions in various moments in the history of South Africa. And again, South Africa is a microcosm for the continent of Africa and the globe, right? A colonized people, any community or society of experienced colonization and systemic oppression can relate to the substance of not in my neighborhood. My family, my father and mother, their families were dispossessed. My mother and they came from the rural part of South Africa, and when forms like the Group Heirs Act of 1950, which was an apartheid law, which basically dispossessed black people from owning land or land ownership. And that, so basically, with the advent of urbanization and rural urban labor migration, because people had no longer had land, so they had to go find work. And so that basically brought my mother's side family to the city of Cape Town. My father, they grew up in districts in the area called District 6, and that's one of the areas that was targeted for the Group Heirs Act of 1950. Which forcibly evicted black folks from the inner city. So you had various forms of spatial violence, right, or architectural spatial apartheid. And so this is the history that I inherit, that I learned about, asking, questions to my family, and then engaging with the substance of this traumatic experience and history and historiography. And this basically led me to make films about farm worker struggles in the Western Cape, which produces some of the most expensive wines, right? That's exported throughout the world. But the labor question and the systemic violence on these farm workers is very real. And I started documenting their stories for a number of years. And this is like going to farms in the most remote part of South Africa. And then engaging with also my family, right? So making a few films about the history of my own personal family and their story of dispossession, and this basically ultimately kind of the pinnacle of working, producing this body of work was Not in My Neighborhood. And which we basically collaborate. I mean, this was a collaboration effort with myself, Najma, and a few other comrades. It was really a global effort to make this film come to manifestation.
So I want to mention you two are married. So we have a husband and wife team here. But I want to know how did it come together in terms of the globalness of it? Why did you choose? You all can jump in, whenever. It didn't have to be.
Yeah.
But why did you choose these three particular cities? I know South Africa because you're from there, Brazil and New York. I mean, how did you bring it all together? And I just think the way that you chose the people's stories and the way they let you freely come into their sphere and document their stories was just very, very compelling. So how did that all happen in terms of the selection of the cities and the people, how they came on board?
One thing I was going to mention that I was thinking when Kurt was talking earlier about his family story is also that, like, we wanted to, initially the whole idea was, how can we draw a line between colonization and gentrification, right? Because at that moment, gentrification was really a buzzword of like, cities around the world are being gentrified, gentrification, like it was becoming more a mainstream topic in conversation. But we really wanted to talk about how this is not a new thing. We cannot look at gentrification as a new, a new act or a new idea. Yeah. So it's like let's look at kind of the origins of invasion and removal, forced evictions, if you will, like that sort of thing, and then globally, because it felt like every city, would have its own local activists. But we really wanted to talk about this is a global issue. It's not something that is happening in isolation, and there's so many similarities. There is literally like a blueprint, a template for how these cities are being flipped and gentrified. And so in regards to like choosing the cities, initially we had a long list of cities. We wanted to include Johannesburg, we wanted to include Berlin, we wanted to include so many places, but then we know like realistically we need to like narrow it down for something that's more feasible for us to accomplish. So we wanted to include New York because that is considered a global city, right? New York City is a city that people around the world look up to. It's just like the number one tourist destination, and the architecture and Times Square, like it has this buzz around it. But there's so many injustices that are happening in this global world-class city that people study and want to mimic in their own cities around the world. So you have like such staggering cases of like homelessness or houselessness, such extreme inequality, such extreme segregation. But people think, oh, it's New York City. No, it's so diverse and it's so this and it has all these amazing things, when there's really some detrimental things happening there. And then with Brazil, that was really important for us to include Brazil, São Paulo, because of its movement of occupation. And we wanted the film especially to have a feeling of resistance in it, not so much this is something that's happening to people, but also show this is what people are doing, this is the action that people are taking. And so yes, in each city we are focusing on activists to some extent, people who are community members who are taking action and trying to be a part of claiming their space and fighting against this system, whether it's fighting against developers or city planners or whatever the case may be, but also show that there is massive action activations taking place through occupation, and this could be used as inspiration or as motivation or something for you to take away with yourself. And so we really wanted the feeling of the film to be one of action, to propel people into action, to push the not just the conversation, but to push this this moment that we're presenting forward, to not have it be stagnant.
Yeah, just to add to what Najma was saying, I think Not My Neighbor also represents a form of a creative pedagogy, right? That speaks about this long history of spatial violence, right? This idea of drawing a correlation between colonization, apartheid, spatial planning, and these new forms of spatial violence, aka gentrification. I think that over the last few years, people have tried to kind of glossify the terminology, having all these long debates, whether it's good or bad, but the lived experience and experience of community being systematically erased, the erasure, I think that was really the big kind of crux for us to really highlight that this is violence, this is violent. Forced people being either forcefully evicted from their homes or economically deprived from being able to pay their bonds, because all of a sudden there's a new demographic group in the community, so the rates are going up, taxes are going up, and this is forms systemic forms that white people, for example, utilizes to systematically remove communities of color out of their space, their homes, their communities, that ultimately produces the real aesthetic, the color, the colorness, the colorfulness that they are yearning for, that they want people to come and come to the communities for. That's the erasure. That's the elements. So they want the aesthetic, but they don't want the person to occupy the space because it represents their own racist ideas, right, about the other. And so for us, it was bringing all these ideas together. I mean, sometimes it was really an hypothesis, you know, it was questions that we had. There was no really like a template that we could utilize to frame Not in My Neighborhood. We really basically create our own architectural structure, right? As a form of an activist tool, as a meeting point for solidarity. In this film, it's also for me was important that also connect Black people from different parts of the world to speak to each other, right? Because clearly, global capitalism and these various forms of global capitalism has impacted us in different ways, but it's the same. It's the same system, right? Whether you want to classify it as developed or developing nation, it's the same thing. Black people, people of color, indigenous people are always, you know, at the bottom of, you know, the pyramid scheme, right? So how do we dismantle the pyramid, right? It's kind of this idea of global capitalism, and we build solidarity to understanding and knowing what is happening locally and globally, right? Knowledge is power. So that's really what we had questions. We don't have answers necessarily. There's no clear answer within the film of like, how do we stop gentrification from happening? I'm not an urban planner. I'm not a policy maker, but I'm a concerned citizen of the world. And this was really the elements and the broader discourse that we were grappling with and dealing with. And that Not in My Neighborhood was really the offering for us to look at the mirror, you know, and say there's something wrong with society. And we've seen obviously that again. This film is, you know, it's a portal, right, into so many other systemic, and we've seen how, for example, COVID-19 has exacerbated, you know, global capitalism and inequalities, right, social economic inequalities to an extent that we have never really grappled with. And so, how do we deal with inequality? How do we talk about housing equity, etc.? So those are just some of the ideas that we were thinking about through making Not in My Neighborhood.
I mean, as I'm thinking, I'm like policymakers and urban planners need to actually see this film because a lot of times I think people sit behind the desk and they make decisions, and the very people that they're impacting, there's a disconnect. And I think that's a big problem. And I think this film makes you look at that disconnect and feel what the people are feeling and what they're going through just to maintain their where they were born and reared, and people, the community. I mean, it was so, like I said, it was just so heartbreaking to see what people have to go through. And these things you don't even think about when the Starbucks moves in and you know, and the neighborhood starts getting you don't even think about who was here before and what happened to them, you know. And
I was going to say, Ada, I was going to say, like, for as far as us selecting our characters or the people that we, you know, connected with, some people we knew or, you know, we had been introduced to, and we wanted to be sure that the people that we were following were people that were actively involved in resistance, actively involved in the struggle to maintain their space. Someone like Darian in New York, we just found him by searching online because he had gotten a lot of buzz around him. Unfortunately, because of how many times he had been stopped and frisked living in New York. And he is an activist, you know, he's with the foundation, Make the Road New York. So he is one person who's definitely on the front lines and training other young people to, you know their rights.
Awesome. He was awesome. The one in the training class with the kids. Okay.
So, I mean, that's how we met him, and we just sent him a message online and met up with him, and then from there we've been together, and we still are in contact with a lot of the people that we have in our film. And then, you know, with the two other women in New York, they were one of them was a friend of Kurt Tabiel with the shop. And then Brazil, I think in Brazil, Kurt, everyone was kind of like introduced to us through someone else, right? Pretty much in Brazil.
Yeah. There was a research trip before we earmarked Sao Paulo, we were playing with the idea that of capturing Rio, right, as the alternative. So Rio was our first suggestion to the city that we want to profile in Brazil, but then Sao Paulo kind of waited out because of specific reasons.
Mhm.
But yeah, everyone that we found in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, were just like word of mouth, folks we met online, folks who we shared like material with. We're like, oh, we're trying to make this film. Check out, this proof of concept trailer, whatever,
Mhm.
And
And this is building a community online, and then eventually and then we eventually went on the ground, and we were with these folks we met online, worked with us actually in the field in Brazil.
yeah, and there's so many organizations like the Landless People's Movement in Brazil that we were able to tapping into the occupation movement that's already happening there. And then in Cape Town, I mean, since like Kurt is from there, it was just knowing that history, knowing the space, and finding people who were going through current, um, you know, uh, proposals of act of eviction in the bordering area of District 6, meeting with those people, and then also just people in the Woodstock, Salt River area that were facing evictions, whether because the owner of the house was, wanting to evict them because that area is a very much up and coming hotspot for young people,
Mhm.
who wanted to go to the farmer's market and all that cute kind of stuff, right? There's actually generations of families that have been there. Like you saw in the film, people who said, I was born in this
Right.
house,
Right.
all of that. And then to really see like, oh wow, what's really heartbreaking to me is like all this time, generation of generation, your family has lived here, never once had the opportunity to buy the property,
Right.
right? Did not have the opportunity to buy the house.
Mhm.
The owner refuses to make any repairs to the house, so you're living in a house that's pretty much in ruins.
Right.
Cutting off the electricity, cutting off the water, and you're literally being forced to leave.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's just a global story for Black people or poor people in general, right? Because even when we have these um, beautiful Black vibrant communities, a lot of times it's like, hold up, we never owned the buildings, we never even owned the space, so we made it our own, but it can be disappeared, it can be wiped away because we
Right.
didn't have always the rights. And if we did have the rights, then it's like eminent domain or a bridge or a highway or something,
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I look at DC. I mean, I look at DC, where Union Market is now. I don't know if you the
mm,
Northeast. That was like a place where Black folks would hang out and go to the market and buy the fish and the vegetables. You can't even get in there now. I mean, it is
yeah.
so push Gucci. It's another world, to the point where those same Black folks used to go buy fish in the market, and it was a smelly market, and it was grungy, and it was like, now it is like that didn't even exist. I mean,
Mm,
it's like there's no trace of Black folks even being customers there like it was back in the day. You can't even
Mm,
put your foot in
mm,
that part of
yeah, yeah. So
the high
it
rise.
was
It's crazy.
exactly. And so it was really, we were very intentional in who are the people that we're focusing on and not so much necessarily hearing from, the developers or the
Mhm.
planners or the activists, I mean, the academics, it wasn't really their story that we wanted to see. And sometimes I feel like we fall into that trip of like, or that trap of person experience it and then the expert to validate it. We
Right,
didn't need
right.
to have the expert to validate anything anyone's saying, because we just want to give you in the moment, in the real life experience of what is happening, and then also show that these people aren't necessarily like activists. They're just people who are wanting to stay in their space and kind of were forced to become activists in a way to show also that anyone could take this into their own hands, and not to think this is some special type of training that you have to become, vocal in your neighborhood or your community.
Not to feel powerless.
Yeah.
In your own community. Yeah, I mean, to me, seeing and hearing the voices from the often the overlooked and the voiceless, it was very moving. I think it can be used as a great learning tool for Black Matter activists, and also to show the gentrified as well as the gentrifiers to engage more in compassionate thought when there's an urban renewal plan in effect. I mean, hopefully. I just think it really connected. And the editing was seamless. The way you went from one place to the other and just connected everybody's struggle to be one, different landscapes, same shit. I mean,
yeah,
exactly. It's a story of DC. It's a story of
San Francisco, DC.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just everywhere.
Wherever. It's really a global phenomenon. And as Najma was saying earlier, you can basically choose any other 3 cities in the world right now and go make a film with the same themes, with probably similar characters with different languages, for example, But it is really, the same issue, and this is really the result of capitalism gone wrong, where
the guy that got me was the guy when you took back in the field in South Africa. He's talking about, this is where I did this. That was my room, and that was like,
every sequence, because you see yourself in that sequence, right? You see your family. You see your grandma, your great grandma standing, in front of a piece of land or property that was once upon a time theirs, and then because of Jim Crow laws and segregation, people were told move, because a highway is coming, or white people need to move in here because we're going to build better schools, etc. And for us, really, going back to like the visual style and the kind of filmmaking process, it was really made in the kind of tradition of transnational solidarity, third cinema, right? Which kind of speaks to the solidarity building through artistic expressions like filmmaking. And also, I think creating a visual tapestry of 86 minutes was for these individuals to have a conversation with each other, right? To in this other dimension speak to each other, but not knowing each other, right? But can relate to each other in this one body of work. So that was really the aim, visually, stylistically, creatively speaking. We worked with a really good friend of mine who's an amazing editor in South Africa, Khalid, and we really, I mean, it was crafted, collectively. It was really like, made also in the tradition of participatory cinema, right? Where we had various, cuts of the film that would be presented to the community. I mean, this film started as a 5-minute short film, right? A concept.
Wow.
Yeah. It grew to a few months later. We ended up with a 37-minute like proof of concept video. I don't know what we called it, like a short film or whatever. And then that really was, the kind of breakthrough for us to produce this 86-minute film. It was playing with ideas, thinking through what's the arc, right? What's the visual arc? What's the visual aesthetic that we're thinking about? And also within the broader context also of our limited resources as well, right? Because, this film wasn't made by a big studio, it wasn't made with a lot of money. It was really a lot of labor of love. It was a lot of favors, people who came through, money trickling in, and then like money's maxed out, and now we have to make another alternative. It was really like a participatory project, where people really believe the importance of the project beyond the artist, the director or the editor or the producer. This was an important story that the world needs to see. So it was really made in that vein.
Wait, what was your budget, especially moving from 3 cities? Did you have a major budget, or were you just kind of like on the fly, like we did with San?
It was, it was kind of a piecemeal type situation.
Yeah.
We would have some funding. We did get some funding. We did do some crowd campaigning as well, crowdsourcing. I mean, it was one of those things where the numbers are always shifting. So we didn't say, okay, this is our number, this is our budget.
Right,
it was like, okay, we have this little bit, we can go to Brazil. We have this little bit, we can go to New York. And so, yeah, it was very much working in collaboration with other filmmakers around the world and taking our time with it. But one of the things, like Kurt mentioned, are our smaller cuts. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed was our pop-up screenings when we would have a 15-minute or a 30-minute cut. I think that was really critical in the early stages of the film, because what we would do is, we would have those screenings, whether it's in a parking lot or in a cafe or whatever the case. But we would have the people that this is mainly happening in Cape Town. We would have the people from the Cape Town segment in the film. We would have them come to these pop-ups, and we would have panels and discussions, Q&As, and it was really cool for. I mean, it was nice as a filmmaker to be like, okay, we're bringing people in the fold into what we're doing, opposed to like, we've made this, now here we are, we're the filmmakers, and we're like presenting this. It's like, no, let's bring, especially the elders, that are in the film, let's bring them here. So the people who are interested in the film, which was usually like a lot of young people, maybe gentrifiers themselves, right, who are coming to the cute cafe for the pop-up, screening, to have that dialogue back and forth.
Wow.
Was really powerful, I think, and just made us make a better film in the end, to get that kind of real-time feedback, opposed to inviting a couple of friends over to, the office and say, hey, look at our cut. What do you think?
Right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
To have like public discourse, dialogue on the topic, on the film, and hearing from people from their mouth who are experiencing directly, was a good way to propel us. And it also just helped us in like getting word of mouth out for the film. And even now, after the fact that the film is done, it's been done for a few years now. We went and we did a campaign online, and people can find us on our Instagram of Not in My Neighborhood, the film. And we did this whole like online series. What was the series called? Why am I blanking now?
Chronicles of Spatial Violence.
Yes, Chronicles of Spatial Violence. But if you go to our IG account, the Not in My Neighborhood IG account, you'll see Chronicles of Spatial Violence. And from there, we took short clips. They're like 2-3 minute clips that didn't make it into the film.
I'm sure you have a lot of those.
Yeah, because we did interview a lot of people, like I said, in Joburg, in Berlin, in Cape Town, in New York, that didn't make it into the film. And we did interview some experts, right, on the topic, urban planners, architects. And so we wanted to still share the information. So we put that on our IGTV, just to.
So 2 things, because as you were talking about that, I'm thinking, one, when you showed it, or did you premiere it in Brazil, in South Africa, New York? When you showed it and the people that were in it saw it, what type of reaction or feedback did they seeing themselves playing back on the film?
I mean, it was obviously very moving. But Najma, please go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, it was, from what I remember, I feel like a lot of, especially the elder people that we had in the film, it was almost like they were shy about it in a sense, It wasn't some like over the top kind of response to it. It was more of like a very humble response of like,
that was in front of y'all. When they got home, I'm sure it was different. Yes, that was in public.
Yeah. I mean, we had our world, like our actual world premiere was actually in the community. Before we went to film festivals, before we learned about where the world premiere will be at, which festival, we went to the community, and myself, my father, and a good friend of ours, we found this basically, neglected park, right? That's supposed to have like, playground equipment that's basically been stolen or just like neglected. Went to this park actually in the street, on the same street that we shot most of the Cape Town stuff on, that the one community that's facing evictions, right? Because of this kind of yuppie bourgeoisie class that's moving in, right? And so we went there and we basically took white paint and we basically painted a TV screen, like a cinema, like a white silk screen. And as well as leftover white paint of my father, we made a little TV. Actually, we made a TV with an antenna, and we hired a projector. Like we got someone who came in, and we basically had our own pop-up cinema. We invited the whole community. We said, this is the world premiere. Before it goes to a film festival to have its world premiere, it will be here. And it was jam-packed.
This was in District 6 or Woodstock?
This is in Salt, like Woodstock, Woodstock area.
Okay.
Yeah, Salt River. And the masses came out, like the whole, so for example, we ran a cable from one of the characters' homes, right? For electricity. And people came there, like people were like, I have hot dogs I want to sell. He said, come through. It became like a moment for a business opportunity. It was just like hella characters there, like mad folks came out.
We needed documentation of that. That scene right there is beautiful.
It was documented.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And it was one of probably the proudest moment for me as a filmmaker. That the community, who has supported this project over the last 4 years, right? Making this film, they were so excited. It was really moving because a lot of the characters in the South African leg, they were there, right? And their families were there, and the neighbors were there. And so whenever the person makes an appearance, it's like there's an encore, there's whistle being blown. It's like it was beautiful. It was like one of the greatest experiences as a filmmaker, like where you really see the power of cinema, like right there, like live and direct,
Now at the end of the film, that's beautiful. Like I said, I wish I could you did behind the scenes documentation of that. That is just beautiful. Well, in the end, you did mark where people were, the subjects that spoke in the film, where they were at the end of the film. Do you all keep in touch to see if there's been any further adjustments or changes in the last 3-4 years after the production? Has there been any progress in terms of people fighting and winning their gains?
Yeah. There's been some successful. There's been some good news stories, if I could call it that. The
like Tabiel and NIMN Park Slope.
São Paulo, for example, they won. They were facing eviction at that moment when we were filming with them by the city of São Paulo, but then they managed to mobilize through civil society, through NGOs, etc., and the landless people's movement. They galvanized support and they won their case. So now that building, Prestes Meyer, is collectively owned by the community. Wow. The tenants themselves, basically, it's a co-op. So there was that beautiful story. There was a story of the South African case as well. So the few people in that one street we were documenting, this family on Bromwell Street, they won their case as well at the High Court. At the High Court, which stopped the evictions, right? The eviction notices.
Okay.
There's this. I mean, Tabayal bought land in Ethiopia, and she's kind of moved now. She moved out.
Yeah.
She just, even though they won their case on Park Slope, I think it's Park Slope Avenue, just like across the road from the Brooklyn
Barclays.
Nets stadium. So Tabial closed shop. She was just tired of
Okay.
just everything, and she just moved to Ethiopia. And then Iman is still holding it down.
They still have the building. They're still in the building in New York.
Yeah. Imani, the Imani House. Imani House is still there.
Okay.
And it's a very important space in the community of Brooklyn, in that Park Slope region.
Yeah.
So those are the stories. I mean, Darian has gone on to do amazing stuff in his life. Since Not in My Neighborhood, he's now, going to places like Puerto Rico, teaching about, cop watch, stop and frisk, and civic rights against policing. Those
sorry. I was going to say, Kurt, about Darian. He's very involved, and Darian even came and presented the film with us on a lot of the film festivals, especially ones in New York, or we would have him Zoom in, because we've done, as the years went on, as we did a lot of festivals, and then we do a lot of university talks, and so we would have Darian or other people in the film, would be able to Zoom in, in this moment. So that was a cool thing of having them engaged, still being able to engage in the film, especially since it's being a global story, of having some of our, further away people in the film could tap into it and keep this conversation going. That's, been that we finished a few years ago, right? And it's nice.
That's what I want to. So where can people see the film ongoing if they want to bring it to their community, if they want to use it as a learning tool to show?
Yeah.
Where can they get a hold of it, or even bring you all in to speak? How
they can go to newdayfilms.com. And so that is the co-op that we're a part of, New Day Films. Not My Neighborhood is on there. You can find us still at our website too, at notmyneighborhood.com. But New Day Films is our film co-op where you can acquire their film for your school, organization, university, and it's also on Canopy as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good, because they can, and that is just ongoing, especially because I think that groups would be, especially Black Lives Matter and different groups like that, would be interested in bringing it to their communities as a learning tool. So, so those are the places, and we'll post that again in our credits as well. So, what is Azania Rising? What are some other things you have so much footage? I'm sure you can make a series and put it on the internet.
Right.
That's right.
Of the people and the places. So what are some things that your production company is going to be moving toward for your next venture?
Yeah, so we have basically been working. I mean, as filmmakers, you are not just busy with one film, right? And so while Not in My Neighborhood was happening, there's all these other films that's been brewing in the bubbling under. So we've been also been writing a slate of feature narratives. And that's basically kind of where Azania Rising for the last 10 years have produced predominantly documentaries and work for television, etc. And I guess the growth process for us as storytellers, also challenging ourselves in terms of the genre we're working in, etc. So myself, I'm planning on shooting my feature film, feature narrative. One of them this year, which is a coming of age magical realism film called Ape Town. And then we also, while that's happening, we just came back from South Africa. We shot a proof of concept for another feature film we're working on about illegal diamond mining in South Africa, which is based on this kind of fictional world. And then we busy writing a few other features that myself and Najma is part of. So it's really the slate of feature films that we're working on, and a whole lot of other stuff in between, right? As a production company, we also freelance, so we produce a lot of commission pieces for whether it's organizations, whether it's a broadcaster. Yeah, so that's really where we're at. I mean, we do a lot of training as well. I didn't mention that in during the talk, but uh, um, uh, as Najm was saying, she works as a lecturer. I myself, I teach cinema, film at university level, but also in community at schools. So that's been, also part of, like this my own process of giving back to community, but also to build other filmmakers as well, right? And to shape their craft and help them shape their craft. So we're working on getting our on a few curriculums we're developing for institutions. So anyway, so that's really kind of where we're at as
Busy.
Very busy.
Well, you definitely are leaving your mark, and we look forward to more projects on the line down the line. Please stay in touch.
Yes.
We want to definitely keep in touch with you all. So, folks, I want to make sure that you're able to get a hold of the film. I'm going to post that again. That's newdayfilms.com. And my God, thank you. This has been
so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, Ada. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you all. Look forward to much more down the line. And